Perfect. Okay, so I see we have a couple of people in the room now. Just while we wait on a few others, first of all, I want to say hi, everyone, and welcome to the first installment of this series of Event Insights. My name is Chrissy, and I am Head of Content and Community for Safe Events. And today joining us, we have Marcel Altenburg. So Marcel teaches crowd science at the Manchester Metropolitan University. And today he's going to be presenting for us on crowd science for events. So today's session, Marcel will probably present for around 45 minutes. After that, we'll have time for a little Q&A. And if for whatever reason, if you have to leave a bit early, this will be recorded. So I'll send a link to people before the end of the week. So in the meantime, I'll pass you over to Marcel. And as I said, any questions, pop them in the chat on the right and Marcel will get to them afterwards.
Brilliant, thank you. Can everybody hear me? Yeah? Okay. Oh, I was told I cannot see others. So please feel free to pop in the chat at any point in time if you can't hear me or if I speak too fast, too German, too slow. Great to see some familiar names on the chat already. So as said, I will talk about like 45 minutes, maybe a bit more, a bit less. Let's see how it goes. But the most important part is afterwards when we open the field for potential Q&A, for discussion, and please also use the time for networking. But basically, this is an introduction to start a thinking process that I want to share here from our university in Manchester. We will go through, we're trying to pack years and years of crowd science into just 45 minutes, which will be, well, we start with the education, something that our MSc students, they go through it 3 years. We try to pack that in like 15 minutes. Then we add another 15 minutes of research, something that every researcher and scientist needs to do. And then we go into practical applications / what the future holds. So we try to have the whole trinity of science, teaching, research, as well as applications. I will start my screen share now, which is the decisive moment. But if you're confident that it's working, you should all see now our university here in Manchester, on as sunny as a day gets in Manchester, but that's basically where I'm based. That's where crowd science is based worldwide. There is no university that is offering a degree of that sense of basically a master in crowd science. That's what I'm program leader of, and that's what we're teaching here. Something that is also very important to us, to not just make it available to MSc students who really want to focus on crowd science, but also to event students of all ages. Like, we are making more and more an effort to get crowd science content into undergraduate degrees so that our event bachelors and so on, that they have a touch point with crowd science early to either know about it when they then have their events a couple of years later and have a professional career, or if they decide to go deeper into it, that they know that it exists. Because very often we hear that people quite late understand that crowd science is a thing. That's what we're actively working against. I'm the program lead of this, I already said this, but before I moved to Manchester, and you might be able to hear a bit of a German accent I hope I don't switch to German. Please remind me if I do. But I moved here from Germany. I was a captain in German Armed Forces, where I really focused on control and leading of combat, which, funnily enough, is not so different from leading an event and controlling an event in a control room. A couple of the topics, couple of the terminology is different, but it can get just as complex and just as fast. So that really helped. At the same time, I studied different disciplines in master degrees, one is human science, which is a lot to do with psychology, sociology, and education, as well as sports science and crowd science. And all of this, my experience together with my education, basically led me here. And I wouldn't be here if we wouldn't also have a lot of contact to real life events. That was an absolute condition for me, that we don't just bury ourselves in the library in the university, but we stay available to real life events with real life event problems, and basically challenging the science, bringing the science forward, And really important to us is that not every problem that real events have at the moment, that they don't require 3 years of studying, but that a solution can be found pretty much straight away. And that will also be the topic of our talk. There's a couple of those examples you see here, may it be the Paris Olympics coming up, or Hollywood Studios, or Formula One. Personally, my heart is in sports. So whenever I have the chance, I work with sports. A lot of football clubs. I think I forgot those 4 world champion stars above the German football logo there. But also with marathons. Why we focus on marathons a lot, I will explain that in our talk. But first we go into the education bit. Something that we do is not just select our events based on what events we want to work with, or what is local, or what is like makes us happy here in Manchester, but we really focus on having a diversification all around the globe. So it is a high priority here that we do work with events in Australia, as well as in South Africa, as well as in Asia, US, and anywhere really, because this is sometimes like time traveling. Especially during COVID, it was absolutely noticeable for everybody that something that is happening right now at the other end of the world might come to us in a year or two, or in a month or two. And although hopefully we all forgot a bit about the COVID terminology, but things like R rates, things like waves, they were a real thing. And having such a connection, having such a network really allowed us to almost see a bit of the future, to see solutions that didn't work, others assumptions that did change, and developments that were on their way to us. So something that really helps, and that really hammers the point home that you don't need to make every mistake yourself. You just need to have access to whatever mistake and whatever learning came from it. And that's what we're trying to do here. Events that we are working with, you can see a couple of examples here, but it always follows a similar procedure. It's always based on somewhat of a novel event, like an event that is somewhat unique, and you can't really test it, you can't really train it. And you see, as I said, examples here without going too much into detail. And there's always some assumptions, some experience. But because it's a novel event that never happened before, assumptions and experience can only get you a part of the way. That can be 99%, and in other cases, it's only 50%. So the rest needs to be filled in with an, for lack of a better word, an educated guess. Basically, science is what that is. That you say, okay, I always compare it to a dinosaur. You have your bones for like 50% of the dinosaur, but you need to piece it together and get an idea of what the whole dinosaur would look like, and maybe even what color it had, or if it has feathers or not, or what it's eating. And you might just have a toe, or you have half a torso. And that's what we're doing. That's where we support events in order to like figure out the missing pieces, especially when it comes to crowd movement. An example that you see on the top left is a world leading festival, pretty new one. And on the right, you see an event that was really fun working on this year in Sydney. It was World Pride. For those that don't know, World Pride is traveling similar to the Olympics. Every 2 years, it shows up somewhere different. This year, it was in Sydney. And you need to take the format that is existing and put it in a completely new environment, which, well, everyone that thinks about it, that there are questions straight away. And those are what we are answering. Similar to the picture on the bottom left, this is a concert, a Rammstein concert in a stadium. Also, the stadium was built in 1936. So again, we see the venue isn't made for what we're using it for. We're doing something different. So we do have a lot of experience, almost 100 years of experience in this stadium, but this isn't a track and field event. This isn't football. So there still are some questions, some percentage lost that are unknown. Same on the bottom right. This is a World Heritage Site, which exists for more than 300 years, but it was never opened as a museum. So again, you have your experience for 300 years, but you're doing something that's unprecedented, and it comes with questions. So this is what we're doing. We can talk about those examples later in depth, but it just basically gives you a start before we jump into the science bit. I now have some videos for you, and I have to warn those that are wearing headsets right now. because we're using an online platform. It might not be super dialed in, it might be super loud, especially on the third video. Let's see. So one example would be the top left. This would be a perfect example of crowd science, where you see Wembley Stadium in the back. You all probably heard the name Wembley, and those that haven't been can at least imagine, well, it's a big stadium. So it is easier to fill the stadium train load by train load until the stadium is full. It's a bit harder to release everybody because now you're releasing a stadium load onto platforms, onto trains. And there's a solution that the police is using. And you can see that here it's basically bite-sizing the crowd down to fit in one train after another. And they do this outside of the platforms in front of the stadium, where they do have somewhat perfect conditions in order to do this. What you see there is crowd science at work. Another example is on the top right, which is from a Comic-Con in Japan. And you see here crowds moving. The interesting bit about it is that you don't see fences. What you do see is cones and marshals. So they're basically guiding this crowd one after another. It follows the same principle as the one on the top left. You don't have all the space and all the time for all the people, but you do have bite sizes and you do need to make it work. And that's very similar to what we discussed earlier when I mentioned the festival. It isn't that there's enough space for all people at all times, at all places at once, but you need to make it work. A funny example, but there's so much work behind it, is the bottom left, the one with the probably loud music you're gonna hear in a second. It looks impressive. Like, look a bit closer and you see all kinds of optical illusions in there. I press the button now. Okay. A crowd scientist, I think I can say that safely. A crowd scientist sees something different when looking at these images as the people standing in this crowd. I'm pretty sure about this. And after, with the festival operator, after we discussed the question, do we really need to do this? After that question is answered with yes, we have to do it. You go into the science aspect of it and look, say like, okay, how far are they moving? How many of those lefts do we have? How many of those rights do we have? Do we have the space? How dense are they? How can we mitigate the risk that comes with it? What is the risk? Is the risk acceptable? Is it not? So that's what we do in cases like this. And here you, just as one of those many things that goes into it, you saw how people basically holding each other shoulder by shoulder, having their arms locked. That is one way of bringing order from a scientific perspective, bringing order into the situation and minimizing the risk by a lot, just by this little thing, including it and then selling it as something that, I don't know, brings unity, cohesion, and God knows what. But it's basically a safety, one of many safety mechanisms in order to make something like this happen, as well as I said, the number of steps and also the duration of the entire process is absolutely mitigated with risk. And the reason why that's necessary is something that we see on the right side here, and that is something that went wrong last year. Hopefully you all heard about it. Hopefully it is something that made its way through the news into everybody's conscience, and that most people heard about it, but it's sometimes surprising, almost shocking, how quickly we forget about something like this. This is less than half a year ago. This happened last year at Halloween, killed 154 people. But something that we also realize when we research something that doesn't crowd science is people in Seoul where it happened, they still know about it and there will be memorials and everything. But the rest of the world often moves on. Those 154 people dying in Seoul, they are not as hard in most people's conscience as it would happen on your doorstep. Although on your doorstep, no matter where you are right now, in Dublin, in Germany, or here in Manchester, we often look at scenarios and we cannot really find a reason why this couldn't happen at our place as well. But the way we understand it in our brain is sometimes a bit protective. So you saw examples here, good and bad, why we're doing what we're doing. And there are a lot of scenarios, also scenarios coming up where this is still needed because, again, we're striving to something that is new, that hasn't happened before in an environment that isn't made for it. And for those that haven't looked into the Olympics 2024 and the plans there, have a look. It's fascinating. The idea is that 70% of the Olympics will not happen in new arenas, but will happen somewhere in the city. And only some 20% will have like updated, changed arenas, and only just a single-digit percentage will have new arenas. So basically, we will bring the the Olympic Games into the city, into an environment that isn't made for it, and it will look similar to what you see here with volleyball under the Eiffel Tower, with fencing and riding in front of Versailles, and potentially even a 100-meter dash on a boat on the Seine. And if you don't have all the environment that you would have in a stadium, which is toilets, which is security, which is seating, all of those things, if you have to do those in a city rather than in a stadium, it comes with a lot of unknowns, with a lot of crowd issues. So we as a species, we cannot help it, but we always have to challenge us. We always have to do something new. And it doesn't always. I leave this picture on for a while on purpose, especially because we just talked about boats in Paris. When we look at something like this, may it be on a plan or may it be something like simple as this picture, it isn't always as it seems from the beginning. We have to sometimes have a second look, and because we all are somewhat limited in time, resources, and everything, we sometimes don't have time for the second look, and we don't see it. We don't see it immediately. And while we're talking about ships and boats, we always start with this one. One that everyone knows, when the Titanic went down more than 100 years ago, we all roughly knows what happened. Nobody was surprised during the movie. But it is still something that, in hindsight, makes us so much smarter. Sometimes even that we think too high of ourselves that this couldn't happen to us. But the engineers of the Titanic and the people who are planning this, they had the same ambitions that we have. They are the same experts that we are. It is just basically that they made a mistake which you wouldn't be able to correct in the freezing water in the middle of the ocean. And we always ask our students at the very beginning just to also be a bit humble about things. Why did so many people die on the Titanic? And the answers are often ranging from cold water, other ships didn't come to help, or mistake by the captain, or it was all Kate's fault. And those are all correct. But basically, we all know if we slim it down to one answer, it would be there weren't enough lifeboats on the Titanic, as there were people that needed to be rescued. So the mathematical equation would be number of people on board minus people that fit in lifeboats. That's the number that you can expect to die in those waters. So that's all clear. That's nothing new. It's just basically a pointed view of looking at it. But let's now imagine there would have been something different. Kate and Leo, they would have gone off in New York. The film would have ended differently. And the Titanic makes it back to Liverpool and has the next guests on it. They go again to New York, and the Titanic is still going. So let's say the Titanic is now, after more than 100 years, captain aged a bit, but still the same captain, is going back and forth between the UK and the US. So they would be able to look back on more than 100 years of experience, more than 100 years of successful travel. But if they would hit the iceberg now, instead of being so, I mean, let's name it, I was really unlucky to hit it on the first journey. But if they would hit it now, the result would be the absolute same. Unless somebody, not on the boat, but probably in a planning office, would say, we should review those lifeboats again. It still doesn't make sense. But they had all those meetings. They had all those meetings before the first launch. And as luck would have it, basically the danger broke itself free on the first ride ever. But the danger was always on board and would have been always on board even for 100 years. And that should remind us to be humble about experience, because 100 years of Titanic captain, you probably got some medals along the way, but it wouldn't help you unless you go back to the planning and say, let's look at this boat again, which brings us to the one on the water. And I have to steal here from, no, it's not stealing, but the professor that started this here before I took over the course here in Manchester, Keith Still. If you don't get enough after this talk here, Google Professor Dr. Keith Still, potentially buy his book, because what we use in order to teach crowd science really stands on the shoulder of this man. And we enrich it with the examples that we have now and in the future. But basically his journey started with Hillsborough, 1989, something that, again, everyone in the UK knows about, I'm sure, and everybody has a feeling about it. Makes them feel really heavy to have like more than hundreds of injured and around 100 dead on the day, and many more with like potential suicides linked to what happened there. And the whole thing is more than 30 years past, but the feeling it gives people didn't change. People that live outside the UK sometimes haven't heard about it. So again, brings me back to the point that we heard in Seoul. And the last one you see on this list of crowd disasters is in Duisburg. For me personally, a very emotional event, because there we had 21 people dying in Germany. I haven't heard about the UK Hillsborough disaster before, but this one definitely was all over Germany. And again, 13 years later, you talk to people and it still makes them heavy. It still like slows them down in their speech if you just mention Duisburg or Love Parade. And you see a lot of other events in between, sandwiched within between. And the research that Keith Still and his team did is they looked at the cause of those events. And you see both events here, left and right, left Hillsborough and right the Love Parade. Google both. The left one, those 96, a lot of them were dead before basically the game was kicked off. And unfortunately, we see dead people on both pictures already. So they looked at basically the reason for all of this, and they found out that in most cases, everything here in red, the reason for that is a design issue. That brings us back to the Titanic, because design is something that, first of all, you do it on the planning table. And the second thing is, it is a danger that is on board. It's a danger that will break itself loose. If you don't see it while planning, you probably wouldn't see it before it's obvious on event day. And that's basically when you're standing in the middle of it and you can't really change it anymore. So the majority is a planning issue, which also often comes with the consequence that you can't change it on the day. So you need to see it before. There's something wrong with this boat. You need to plan it before, and you need to prevent it before, because once you're on the cold ocean, it might be too late. So that's much for the education part. We'll now jump into the research part. And I mentioned marathons earlier. Well, we're right in the middle of it. Boston Marathon, the oldest marathon in the world, was just 2 days ago. The London Marathon is on this weekend. If you're all event professionals or even risk professionals, Google the London Marathon. I can't tell you what you find, but Google it. It's a very interesting year. And those marathons, they have one big advantage for us crowd scientists. It's a lot of people moving all at once citywide over a long distance. I will show you a short video. I warn those that still that haven't lost their hearing in the first one. I warn you, there's some sound to it, so please be careful with your headphones. Starting the video now. So you saw all those numbers in there. Obviously, I'm going to the numbers first. More than 190 countries, millions of spectators, 6 different cities on different continents, and thousands of people, like hundreds of thousands of people running and participating. And they're all wearing a timing device. They're, wherever they go in the city, even the days before the event, they are always tracked wherever they move. I mean, this makes a this makes a crowd scientist really happy that I can track hundreds of thousands of people while they're moving through the city, and I can use it for my research. I think it makes a crowd scientist just as happy as it makes the NSA that we're all buying cell phones. So it's just an opportunity we have to use, and I mean it's also a great sport for those that didn't like those images. You should check your pulse. That's obviously a nice that's obviously a nice edition as well. So we do have a really good connection as a university to all of those races that you've seen there, all of the 6 world marathon majors, and we work with them in order to optimize their races, may that be Boston 2 days ago or at the end of the week, London, which were both in this list. And as a result, we get all their data. And just for those that don't know marathon running, well, first of all, it's long. It's 26.2 miles, and you see that here on the left. We can all agree that New York is a big city, and we're running through all 5 boroughs that you see here: Staten Island, Brooklyn, Queens, Bronx, Manhattan, over the whole course that you see here from the start to the finish. So we're tracking people mile by mile, but it's not just that. We tracked them before when they use the ferry to go to Staten Island. We tracked them even the day before when they arrive at the expo where they pick up their bib number. We tracked them post finish when they walk through different stages of a festival that is at the end, where they get their clothes back that they handed in before. They're spending some time, they're drinking whatever they want to drink afterwards, and hang out with families. So we can collect all this data because the runners, they need to be timed, and for that they wear either a small chip on their shoe, which is basically just a magnet, nothing that requires any battery, or it is part of the bib number that they're wearing anyway, that they're picking up from us anyway. So it's basically a magnet strip within the bib number. And all of this we get, and all of this we use to optimize the experience as well as the safety for those races. And because in a lot of events, we don't have this luxury of having hundreds of timing points throughout the entire event. If you imagine a festival or a stadium, you probably only have one scan, and that's the ticket scan. You don't have exit scan normally, you don't have movement scans, you don't have any scans down the road that you can see people coming. You only have this one scan or a handful. So everything that we're learning from events like this, we can use for other events where we don't have this luxury. And it doesn't need to be running. It could also be something with walking or service and so on. The New York City Marathon, or the whole marathon world, is also constantly growing. It is a very young industry, and an industry that is not done yet growing. This is what it looked like roughly 45 years ago in New York. That's the start that you had there. Everyone fits on one half of a picture. And have a look at the toll stations that you see at the top of this picture. And if I show you what it looks like now, you see the same toll station, but you see a different number of runners. And what you see here is also just 20% of all runners. You see 3 different corrals, or 3 different start lines actually. 2 of them, they will run on top of the street, on top of the bridge. And the one that you see on the right will take the same bridge for the start, but it will be at the lower level of the bridge. And then we refill this a total of 5 times until we have 100% of the runners on the course. So we do have our runners basically going throughout the whole experience throughout the entire weekend, which will start with arriving in the city. We know that they normally stay 2.3 times on average in our city, may it be New York, Chicago, London, Berlin, Tokyo, Boston. And they will go to an expo at some point. So we track them to that expo. We know their behavior. We know if they bring additional people. We know how fast they're moving from one stall to the next. We know what they're doing roughly. And then they go to the start, just to keep it simple, but I want to show you a couple of those touch points. They go to the start taking either the Staten Island ferry, because the start is in Staten Island, or they're taking a bus, but they need to take one form of public transport or provided transport. We can track that as well. We know their behavior on the ferry, do they spend additional time or do they move on? How fast is it if they move on? How many people fit on the ferry? Which is different. If people take the ferry normally, the Staten Island ferry is free and everyone that goes to New York should use it. It's great for sightseeing. But if you use it on a marathon morning, you might pack different on the ferry and more people get on the ferry or less. That's stuff that we measure. And then we measure the start and we get more data from the course and we get more data from the aid stations. We get all the data. I don't want to use the word data porn, but if anyone knows a better word so I can optimize my vocabulary, please put it in the chat. But basically we can measure everything and it's almost up to us to understand what questions do we want to ask for this industry to optimize things or for other industries where we don't have this luxury. And if we break it down, it's either free movement, things that we see here on the left. That means people move between two timing points without anyone interfering. So we can almost check their behavior. We can understand if you're 60, what is that you're doing? Or if you're 18 and you're from Germany, like what is it that you do and how do you move? It could also be that you're not moving freely, but you're moving past somewhat of a restriction. That could be an entry gate. It could be something that's in your way. It could also be stairs. Just something that we put there or that is there that restricts your movement. And we can measure that from one point to another. Or it could be a service where we either give you a service or you need to go past a service that's on the way, like loading a bus. Or receiving a bib number or getting a drink or God knows what. And that's the whole journey that at one point will lead you to the finish that you see here on the right and obviously all along the course. And I want to take you back to the start as one of the examples, but I mean, we could talk you for years, but I want to take you to the start in order to explain the principle. Everyone at the end of this will also be able to take this logic home with them, because you don't always need big computer simulations to make this happen. It's more like an understanding. It's more an understanding of one point to another works, as well as knowing that if I can't make it happen with pen and paper, which works for a lot of cases, but if I can't make it happen and I need big computer technology, then well, you should know that it's out there and that some people can help answer those questions. So what we have here is the start. And as I told you, we have 5 waves and 3 different starts. So you see the 3 starts on the small image, 2 that will take the top of the bridge and the one on the left that runs at the bottom of the bridge. And we start them 5 times over the course of 2.5 hours, which is quite interesting. The first runners are already in the finish and the last one I haven't even started yet. And that will lead us to a result at the finish if we start people in a certain way. You can imagine that if you have 5 waves or 4 waves or 3 starts or 4 starts starting simultaneously, you would always have a different result for everything on the course. For the runner, the first meters would be different. For the aid stations that come at mile 1, the day would be different if everybody would start at once or we start them in 7% increments. So all of this changes something. So we needed to ask ourselves the question, what does change? So how can we measure what the impact actually is? And we said, well, the biggest challenge would be to measure this, to calculate the finish. We measure the start, we decide to start in a certain way, and we then can calculate what the impact is for the finish 26.2 miles away. That would be, for us, if we can figure that out, we can figure out everything along the way because that's the longest distance where people do what they do, but we know how they would arrive at the finish based on our start procedure. So we calculated something like this. I don't need to go into too much detail, but you can see the timing at the bottom. Starts with 2 hours, goes all the way to 9 hours. So that's our full event day. And you can see that this graph is kind of going up and then going up to reach a peak around 4 hours, 20 minutes. Then stays somewhat steady before it drops down again after roughly 6 hours. So if you would be in the finish, you would basically see runners coming past the finish line that you need to give water, give medical attention, give medals and high fives. But it would pretty much look like this. After 4 hours and 20 minutes, you would have a peak, then it would stay steady, then it goes down. And for everything that is post-finish, may that be a pinch point, may that be a family point where we meet their families, this is basically reality for there. So we calculated it just based on the start. And we see those 2 lines here. One is the calculated line in red and the yellow one is the line how it really happened. So we realized we can calculate it. That is research that was done pretty much 8 years ago, and since then was refined. So we can use all of those timing points. Some races, let's say they have 5, others have hundreds, and we can use those to fill the gaps, to fill those blanks that I mentioned in the very beginning, that we do have a lot of assumptions, enough assumptions to point at something that we want to fix. And then the rest is filled in with data science, with crowd science. So basically we knew we were onto something. We can predict, after knowing one point and knowing the logic behind it, we can predict the next point down the road. May that be running or may that be a service. And that means we can change it. It's in our hands, as it was before. But to be super honest, I don't know if marathon people are on this call, but you might agree that, like, let's say 10 years makes it less embarrassing. But 10 years ago, when we started a race, it was based just on experience. But we didn't know 100%. We just said, let's start in 3 waves. Sounds safer than 2. But that was that. And now we can do it down to 99.9% accuracy. And that results in something that we see here. You see the start of the Chicago Marathon. And I want to show that to you in a time lapse. It's my favorite video in the world. I probably show this on every time I teach my students. But it shows us all those things that go into it from a science perspective. You will see timing. Like, you will see 12 different waves. Some of them, they have only 30 seconds in between. Others have 5 minutes in between. So you see 12 different waves, 2 bigger breaks, and then 11 smaller breaks. You also see something, if you look closely, where it says Bank of America. Just on top of that, you see a bit of a pinch point. That is a 26 feet pinch point, which basically works a bit like a reduction, a bit like putting a brake on, a bit of like closing the tap a bit. So not letting the water tap, or here the runner's tap, open 12 times, but only opening it to a safe degree. So you see that. One is timing, one is geometry, basically physics, and then you also will see order. So everybody here that's in yellow, those are volunteers, and you will see how they order people based on pace. And if you look closely, you can see lollipops in the middle of the picture. They say A, B, C, D. Those are basically timing groups. And we ask people to give us their projected finishing time, and we order them accordingly. And we know maybe we only get it right to like 84%, 16%, they either have a bad day or they lied to us or they think they're better than they are. But we use this in order to order the field, which is very similar to what I described earlier when people lock their shoulders, lock basically and walk in sync or jump in sync, what we saw at this festival. So it's the same things again. It's timing, it's physics, and it's order. Stop talking now and I run the video. Here you see again our pinch point, 26 feet in that year, and we change it every year depending on the circumstances. So they're building up, and they go out one by one. The good thing about this pinch point is also that you can't really see it from the front. So if you take pictures from the front as like a photographer, or if you're the sponsor, you will see that your brand is still represented in full. This is all just operational things that happen in the background. But that is something that makes me really happy, that we are able to give applicable, sensible operational advice without being too academic. One of the reasons that I said that are non-negotiable for me, that it is something that does work in the real event world, but is based on science, but not the other way around. So we get our finish flow as I described it earlier, based on our start. The start is the last time that we can do something with runners. Afterwards, they wouldn't listen to us anymore. They're on their earpods, they're on their run, they paid for this. You cannot just stop them and say, hey, can we reduce the flow a bit? Like, that wouldn't work. So basically the start is last time we can do something, and from then on needs to work. So the start needs to cater to the biggest restriction we have on the course or post-finish. And you have that in every event. In every event, you will have a biggest restriction somewhere. May it be time that you don't have or space that you don't have. And everything that leads to this point of the biggest restriction, I don't know, a small door or hot dogs aren't fast enough, God knows what. But if you know your restriction, everything that is before can cater that you meet the resource that you have, and you won't have a queue or something that's unsafe or unsatisfying. So that's what we're doing here, and we do it throughout the whole city with tens of thousands of runners. And to give you one example, here we see our peak in the finish calculated at 1,366 runners or finishes per 5 minutes. And if we then measured it for real, it was just one runner more. So it shows us that this data works. And we since applied it to so many more events, marathon, but also concerts or football games constantly, or traffic or transport. So we know that this principle works, and we can feed it with all kinds of data. So we take the marathon data out, but we leave the logic in there, and we feed it with other data, and it continues to make sense. And then in the next thing, if we would use it for a festival, for example, we can then adjust it more and more to this festival until it becomes native. And everything is basically in our hands. We need to find out the first time that we can influence people, and we need to find out what is our biggest restriction. And then everything in between is in our hands with no excuse. And we see that here people are spaced out nicely on the course. We don't want them to have more space in this particular location, but we also don't want them to have less space. So we need to know exactly what we want, and then there is a way to make that happen. And here on this picture, you see that people, well, they feel that they're running in a pack. That's nice. That's what they want. But we also feel that everyone here has enough space to move, to overtake, to run their race freely, and not feel in any way unsafe. So if our start, or to take it away from the marathon, if our actions have consequences, that means we can also change them from either one result to the next one. And if we need to change things along the way, which happens in events, I heard, then we can change things even on the fly or in preparation, where we need to say, okay, let's do something different because what we're doing is catered to a restriction somewhere metaphorically down the road. I'm almost done to meet the time that I was given, but obviously the science, we're one step further. I was never able to bring this to an event organizer. This is a bit too scientific, but basically we can look at what you see here. Every kilometer of the race is one slide. And if you have any questions on this, we can maybe do this afterwards. But basically every slide here is 1 kilometer, and you see the start at the very front. That's kilometer 0. And then it walks backwards until the last slide. That's the finish. And we can see how the race develops, how the flow evens out, goes down, but doesn't go down evenly. You also see that those waves in the very front, they aren't evenly distributed. There isn't the same gap between first and second and third, but it comes together in a certain way. And we can look at everything. There's nothing in this race that we can't look at, that we can't measure, that we couldn't adjust. So it's now in our field to say, what is it that we want to adjust? And that's where the experience and the science goes hand in hand. Experience needs to point out what may be wrong, and science can then help make an educated decision. Okay, that's always here I'm always running the risk of losing people, but that's where it's the most fun for us as scientists. One last thing, forgive me, then I'll go back to the pictures and my talk. But you see here that the first wave and the second wave, right? They go together, and the one that's the furthest back, the last slide, the smallest, they haven't grown together yet fully, didn't they? The first and the second wave. And that's interesting because the first and the second wave, they're actually closer together than second and third, but they are grown together perfectly in the end. So that's basically where a lot of calculating power helps us, something that is hard to understand in our brain. So to summarize, with crowd science, we are researching where people move, how they gather, what is their psychology, when do they speed up, when do they slow down, what is it that delays the process, and when does it play in our hands, and when does it not. And we basically can take apart any event into free movement, into service, into restrictions, and check, is it all in a balance? What we try to achieve is a balance. Something where we never run out of people, but we also never run into a risk. And we can apply this to many events, but it's marathon season. So I give you one last one, one that we celebrated a lot in Berlin. Using this approach and tweaking things that were easy to tweak, but the organizer just didn't know before, that basically helped us to finish the event 10 minutes early. If you tell your city that you're giving your streets back to the city 10 minutes early, that's something that they normally don't hear. They normally just hear, can we have the streets a bit longer? We're a bit delayed. So you're not just on time, you're also early. They were less busy, 9% less busy all around the event, on everything, post-finish, on the expo, everywhere, just because we optimized the numbers a bit. And everybody that worked felt like, well, this is less hectic than it was last year, noticeably, almost 10%. But at the same time, we increased the number of runners running there. And that obviously makes a change to the bottom line. If you save time, if you don't need to work as hard, and you have more participants, and sometimes we even allowed up to 5,000-6,000 more participants without making the race more stressful, which obviously has an impact on costs and everything. Imagine you could work 10 minutes less, or you can work less hard, and you make more money in the end. So that's basically what it helped us to optimize. We also had a world record, but from a crowd science perspective, it helped us optimize the system, and such extra resources that we can go to optimize, they're in every event. They're in every day-to-day routine. They are out there. We just need to identify them and use them. So to wrap it up, we use those for pretty much everything that can either cause a risk or cause an impact on the experience, which is road width in this case, because it's a road race event. But it's all matters of staffing, resources, expansion strategies, emergencies, or mid-race changes if necessary. So the focus always is on safety and experience. And that is something that we also need to understand. On the other side of a safe event is a good event, like a nice experience. And that's something that you often can work on at the same time, making the event safer, but also making the experience better. Makes perfect sense, right? Because if you're unsafe, you don't have the best experience. So that was me talking about running. But if we apply this to stadia, and we're doing this constantly here in Manchester, we do like our football. Same as Munich. I just put them on because they're playing each other today. Let's see how that goes. And if we then use a stadium either for a new purpose, which could be in the case of the Allianz Arena that we see here, could be the upcoming European Championships in Germany. They're using the Allianz Arena differently than it's normally designed for club football, or in the case of Manchester City, where they're using the stadium for a concert, something that it's not designed for. They cannot use their normal entrances. They cannot use their normal facilities. Again, we have our balance that is basically out of balance, but we do have our experience, and we do have the rest that we need to fill with an educated guess based on science. You don't need to learn this one by heart. It just shows us that even in football, we do have our stats, we do have our numbers, and those numbers can help us to be the gateway into a data analysis and bringing those all into a balance. Because whenever one of those readings is too high, well, it's either a risk or it's a resource that's wasted. That brings us back to those examples that I mentioned. I just mentioned them again. It could be a festival that nobody has ever seen before, something world leading. You do have a guest that gets you there, and you have experience, but there's something that you need to supplement. Same on the top right, World Pride, great event, and it will travel again to Washington, D.C. in 2 years. Stadia that are like 100 years old, and now Rammstein is coming, or museums or World Heritage sites that are more than 100 years old, but you never have any experience based on what you want to do with them next. Or, and that's my final slide, something that nobody in our lifetime has experienced, and that was basically the funeral proceedings, everything that happened around the death of Queen Elizabeth II last year, which I was advising the Scottish government based on the first steps along the way of Operation London Bridge. This one was Operation Unicorn, where basically the same logic applied. We did have some assumptions based on the last time that happened 70 years ago. and we did have assumptions of knowing the city, but there was so much that we didn't know. So we used a similar algorithm. We fed it with the data that we had. We got more data along the way, fed it into the algorithm, and got a better and better picture. So in the beginning, we needed to basically supplement more than 50% of unknown, and in the end, we got it down to the second. We literally got it down to 99.9% again, based on the same approach that I showed you before. I don't want to know what happened if we would not have done this. That's it. I'm done. Last thing that you see here, and I'm just a minute late, is Manchester. You should all come either to university or just visit the city. And I'm stopping my sharing now. Start the camera again and want to see if there's any questions. My biggest worry along the way is that I would get a call and somebody says, "Hey, we lost you like 15 minutes ago," and I'm just here talking to myself.
No, Marcel, that was absolutely fantastic. Speaking for myself, I heard absolutely everything here. As you might have seen in the chat there, guys, Mark popped in. If you want to ask any questions, we have a Q&A only section here on the right. So Marcel, if you want to click on that, you should be able to see the questions that we have coming up.
Part two. Well, yeah, we are working on this regularly in all branches. I know that like if somebody lets me talk and you just said you have 15 minutes, I start talking about marathons and road running because that's where we get our data from. But we have this for all kinds of events, and there is a part two because we're constantly working with hundreds of events. Some they really just use an algorithm. For others, we work very closely with them in order to solve their problems. And those problems, like something that we had last year with the Queen, it is a solution as well as it is a new research case. Something that we're still researching, something that we will be able to present when the time comes. So it will be a part two. Like I'm too young to retire. How do you promote crowd safety budget spend with clients who are event organizers? Yeah, that's an interesting one. I found myself sometimes more being on a hospitality budget, getting my flights paid and getting a hoodie in the first year because they didn't have a crowd safety budget because it's something that was new. But we were able to show them that that's something necessary, and we created something like a crowd safety budget in some events in some industries because they realized that you cannot do it without this anymore at this day and age. But one thing that is absolutely true at the other side of like safety and risk is a good experience because people will feel if something is safe or even just a bit dodgy, they will feel that and it will have a direct impact on their customer experience. So linking those two and not stopping also, to be honest, not stopping when you make something safe, but see, maybe you can make it even better than safe. Maybe you can something where you give the customer something back. And maybe that's something that translates into money. Give you one calculation. I mean, that wasn't part of a pitch, but it became obvious. If you can increase the New York City Marathon by 10,000 people, and they all pay $500 for it, that pays for your crowd scientist, barely, But like it's you, but that's where you can create extra money because you optimize those resources, and it isn't my pitch. I don't want to say that, but it is something that that goes hand in hand.
Yeah, it is a very good point though, Marcel, because it's sometimes I think something that in the safety function we can often lose sight. I say we, the royal we can often lose sight of is that ultimately we're also there to contribute to that end good experience, and we can't be just objectionable all the time. We can't just be roadblocks all the time. Anything we can do to achieve what we need to, but also be realistic about experience. And I think that should have been part of your pitch, by the way. I think that's perfectly legitimate, because at the end of the day, money and budgets are a legitimate concern. So I think if we all keep sight of that in every function planning an event, I think it all goes much better. I mean, we've had shows where we've been able to release back budget that was assigned to us simply because we didn't need it. And I think if you do that on some shows and you need a bit more on another show with the same client, I think you're building that relationship and it works better that way.
Yeah, and very often it is that if I know what's happening, I don't need to make an early decision. Maybe a decision that wasn't necessary because I know what to expect. I have my eyes on it, but I don't need to do something because I don't know how it's to help me then to, like, let's say, stop a show or something, to say something crazy. And obviously that has a monetary impact. The better I know what I'm doing, the more money I will save because it's a better guess. And that basically answers some of the question that I said here from Andy, who's asking how can we influence crowd movements in the digital world to achieve improved data. Well, the first one is really to figure things out, to understand the data, and then to influence it. That is probably a question that depends a bit on what it is that you're doing on your industry, and I'm happy to discuss this deeper. But the move to put those timing mats in the marathon world into the expo, into train stations, into this ferry terminal, that is something that's fairly new, but it makes absolute sense. If you have people wearing a timing device anyway in their luggage or on their chest, depending on what day it is before the event, why not put a timing mat there with the intention to make it safer and to make it a better experience? So we started rolling those timing mats out all over the city in order to understand the data better and then differentiate what data can we change, what behavior can we change, and what can we not change, and work on those that we can change, or pinch points, so to say, and influence those that we can change and make them a balance. So we always need to understand that certain things, they are not in our hands for multiple reasons, but the rest then needs to basically adhere to this one. I hope that answers the question from Andy. I will scroll down a second, but I see the question from Ellie. How are you or even the crowd science professionals making considerations, particularly around the creating crowded areas within participants running and cycling, or within participants are working alongside security? Consideration given the impending legislation. Think about searching regimes may affect crowd flow greater. Yeah. I think I understand the question. Long question, but it is, again, it's a matter of balance. But one thing that's we found is we work in a lot of countries. We work with a lot of countries. It's sort of the map. So we basically know there's no way around the laws of physics. They just won't change no matter what politician is trying that. And often this can change things that are either law within a company, may it be a security company that is doing your searches, or may it be the law in a certain city or in a certain country. So those are the approaches that we take. We show what is possible, what is not. And quite often that means, well, I don't want to say the law needs to change, although we definitely did this. But quite often it means that the ways of doing things, the internal procedures, they need to change accordingly. And what we do in cases like this is basically just to measure it out. How much space do we need for queuing? How much space do we need for searches in order for them to work? There's even psychology that goes into it. If I stand too close waiting to an area that looks frustrating, like searches, and I do have the chance to jump it, or to at least put pressure on the system to, like, disrupt the system and maybe even break through, if you talk about a football game, we take this into consideration as well, and we give it extra space to not get people into this. You can even influence people's frustration level. If you show them something that is so close to them, but you won't give it to them, they need to wait. You just let them wait somewhere else, and it works out. Disney does we doing a bit of work with Disney, and it's perfect. Like, you spend the whole day in the theme park, and you think you're having the best day of your life, and it's all your choice. It wasn't your choice. It's Walt Disney's choice what you're doing. He just makes you think you're having a free will to just point the picture here a bit more. But basically that's what it is. So psychology plays a big role in this. Hope I answered the question correctly. I jumped to the top one, but then I will scroll down. Could wristbands have a strip that could allow monitoring of crowd movements similar to Boston Marathon? In a way, yes. There, you can overcomplicate it. You can make yourself a slave of the technology. If you have something that's constantly monitoring, that means you have a lot of data, maybe even more that you can overview, or it's easy to fail. But something that can show you're going past somewhere, the technology definitely exists. It can be part of a ticket that you say, well, I moved through this area. Cameras can do something like this. And you don't need to know everything. That's sometimes the misconception, very expensive, a misunderstanding that event organizers have, that they need to know everything. That's not the case. When we work with an event organizer, we often point out you need data from here. And if you can, get data from here. And that will paint the dinosaur. But it isn't that I need everything. At one point, it's great, looks good, but I don't have the time to look through all of this, and I don't need all of this. And if somebody's paying for it, wristbands, depending on what they're doing, yeah, sure. But like a device in the ticket could do this, or other ways. Sometimes even a person with a clicker. We still use more clickers than you think we would use. But like somebody clicking for 1 minute every 15 minutes in the right location can help us. You talk about deploying the timing mats fascinates me, and then thank you. And it makes me wonder why this aspect of marathons are not used throughout the event world more. How quickly do you think will take for this technology to be adapted to more events? Call them. Great thing. Like the Mika timing is the world leader on this. You also will find other ones. They do have those devices, and sometimes really just an explanation to the participants or to the spectator or to your crowd. Why would they do it? In the marathon world, it's easy because you give them a medal for it. We need to time them, so it explains itself. So they're doing it without any concerns. But as I said, like people convinced us to wear a observation device with us, and it makes all perfect sense. And we even pay, I don't know, I buy them used for $100, but I heard that some people like they pay more for their cell phone. But there was a narrative why we should buy this, why we should have it. And if you can make that in your event, why they should wear basically a magnet strip, which can be part of a ticket, can be part of whatever. The technology is definitely out there. It's not that expensive, but it is very linked to endurance events. So if you call them and say, I want them for my festival, they will definitely listen. Like, and they do have the technology. It's a great question. Really, guys, think about this and call them. They're also cheap.
Oliver, look what you've done. You've gotten them all excited now about another nerdy application of the tech he already loves.
Yeah.
Put it everywhere.
No, it is great, honestly. On those, literally, we put it all over New York City, and that wasn't the case years ago. It really just comes more and more and more, and it doesn't cost anything. How could we influence crowd? No, I did this one. How do you account for variables like, oh, that one hits home hard, football fans, with or without alcohol, demographics, and so on? Well, there are ways how we include this, and it is again goes back into the order aspect. So we always look at physics. When does it hurt because it's too tight? Time. When do we run out of time? Those are pretty static, measurable things. But things like alcohol, if your team won or lost, if you are leaving the event in an emergency, or if you're leaving the event under normal situations, all of this has an impact. And we look at the crowd psychology in this, which if you're confused, you're slower. Like you might run faster, but everyone that watches a horror movie knows that like if you run away from murder and you're confused, he will get you. And the same in a way happens to the crowd in our events. And then we often look at the structure, which means, especially when we talk about here, do you say the word hooligans? No, but you say football fans. Very often they are structured in a way that helps us, and we can play with that a bit. We can again understand their structure and use it. If you, without saying too much, but if you would say you would have a call for a protest, which does not have a structure, now we're looking at completely different things. Now it's a lot of individuals doing something, but they're not really structured in a hierarchy from the top. Doesn't make sense. So now we need to look at different things. Now we're looking at a crowd again, but not as an organism, which is with ultra fans or with normal football fans quite quickly forms. Wow, that was a confusing answer, but I can't go into any more detail, especially this week. I'm scrolling down the question, then I go back up. No, I think I answered all questions. I'm doing Manchester Pride this year. Great. As an event safety organizer, pop down for a coffee. Yeah, like coffee. Like second one, what course Marcel teaches. Well, there's a good and a bad answer, or like a good and a not so happy answer in this. Like, we are not stopping teaching crowd science here at Manchester Metropolitan University, and we'll only become more. But right now, as I said, we changed a bit our approach. Rather than teaching people like Mark or myself or people that are even older, like we did in the past, we're now focusing more and more on people that just have their first touch points with events, so that they understand from the beginning that this is not just one additional, maybe even boring or annoying aspect of events, but it is that crowd safety or safety is a fundamental part of it. So we are more and more giving them units within their degrees and changing their existing degrees. And then as they grow up with this, there will be more and more things which then also allow more experienced MSc students to join again. But right now we do have a hole there because we started just with MSc only, pretty detached from the undergraduate degrees. Now we moved over to the other side and we'll grow with them. So I'm looking forward. I like my 18, 19-year-old students, but I think they're not on this course, and I'm looking forward to like have a more mature audience in the future as well in my classroom. That's why such webinars here are so useful, because it's a different audience.
Can I just pick up while you're reading questions just on something Robert Brown put in the chat and makes a very valid point. The global, for people who are quite kindly saying how much they're enjoying this and glad to see it back and all that, there are other organizations doing stuff that you just may or may not be clued into. The GCMA, the Global Crowd Management Alliance, do some stuff that's really, really good. They've got some really good people involved. I know they have some webinars and stuff coming up. They're clever. They do webinars where it's for members only. So you should definitely, let me just follow up on Robert's comment and put the link for the GCMA just in the chat there if you're interested. They are doing some really, really good stuff and have representation globally, which is why a lot of us are quite keen on it as an organization. So check that out if you're interested in kind of more educational stuff, more webinars, more networking in and around the, you know, the crowd safety, crowd management kind of field. They're actually really good. Some great people involved over there.
100%. So I think I'm through with the questions. I could talk forever.
I think you did get all the questions there, yeah. Yeah, that was absolutely fantastic, Marcel. Thanks a million. Even throughout the whole presentation, the chat was going wild. Everyone found it really, really interesting. So thank you so much for that.
Anytime.
Mark, do you have any parting words?
No, I was just going to say you did very well to twist Marcel's arm and get him to do a webinar. I know how much he hates this stuff. No, listen, genuinely though, and again, apologies to everyone that I was late coming in. I had to teach a lecture and actually only got here when I did because all the tech in the university went down and we all got kicked out, which was great. So I got here faster than I thought I would. No, genuinely, I want to thank Marcel from our perspective, for Chrissy, myself and the team here for being willing to be the first to jump in and kick off the new series of webinars. I think anyone who remembers what we did in COVID will remember it slightly differently. It was, you know, there were 2 a week. It was bang, 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 keep us all engaged, keep us all kind of interacting with each other. I think it did a job. It was fine. But I think what we're doing with Event Insights now under Chrissy's kind of guidance and leadership is it's going to be more of a consistent type of a thing. And as sessions become available or someone expresses an interest, we'll add another one in and we'll let people know. And it's going to be kind of more of a regular thing that we're trying to do rather than a blast in a series with a set period of time. So that's a call out to anyone here, anyone you think would be good for a session. We've got some really good ones coming up. Some people who've done them before, a lot of people who haven't, which I really like. And from our perspective, and I may regret saying this, but we're quite happy to look after like this end, the tech end, getting the word out as much as we can, all that kind of stuff. I'd nearly go so far as to say, like, if you have something to talk about, if you have something niche-y, if you have an expertise somewhere, let us bring that audience to you. We're reasonably good at doing that and getting the word out about stuff. We can do that donkey work if you have something that others will benefit from. And I think we had like 300 and something people registered for this. I know a lot of people will catch a recording when we put it available. 160 in the room. If there's 2 people in the room, but they're getting value out of it, we are happy to do that and facilitate that. If there's 20 people, 2,000 people, it doesn't matter. It's not about the numbers for us. So think about it. If there is something you might be able to deliver a session on, please do get in touch, because we're happy to do this work to get the people in the room and spread the word and do the tech end. So have a think about that. We've had loads of really good new stuff come up. And thank you to Chrissy for leading on this. People who know me know that it's amazing for me to have other people in here leading on stuff now that we've expanded the team a bit. So being able to do two things today at the same time is not something I'm quite used to. So having Chrissy leading on this has been really, really good. So I'm waffling a bit in case anyone wants to throw a last question in. Feel free before we go. Marcel never runs away too quickly, but we don't want to take all his day either. So if you do have any last questions, pop them in. Keep an eye out. If I understood what I was told correctly, I believe Chrissy plans to send out a link later in the week with a follow-up on the session, maybe tell you about the next one that's coming up or whatever. Keep an eye on our socials in the usual spots. You'll see whatever other sessions we have coming. And genuinely, if anyone has anything else they want to do and we might be able to support, the good people from the GCMA and the UK Crowd Management Alliance got in touch this week and we kind of co-promoted this a bit, which is really welcome. We're always happy to do that too. So if you're doing anything that will benefit the industry and we can do something to help, please let us know. This does not have to be just us or a few others. We're keen on everyone to kind of get involved, and if we can help in any way, we will. I think you're off the hook for questions, Marcel, my friend. Now, I'll put you on the spot slightly before we go because people are asking for that second session. We may hit you up in a couple of months to come back and do some version of a follow-on for people who did catch this or will have seen it on a recording, and you can maybe go a bit deeper into certain things that you're extra nerdy about, maybe?
Yeah.
Your stuff always goes down really well, so.
You had me at deeper, yeah.
I thought so. So look, again, without Marcel and Chrissy and I promising it, we're all but promising it. We will have another session with him later down the track when we can fit it in, where he might go into certain key areas. And if any of you have the area you'd love him to go into deeper, get in touch, let Marcel know. He's always open to suggestions. If there's a few people saying the same thing or the same area, we could probably look at that. A second session about the 6 million marathon spectators, says Eric.
Yeah.
That might be a private session. Okay, cool. Anyone else? Chrissy, do you want to say anything to wrap up?
I think that covers everything. Yeah, as Mark said, I will be sending out a link before the end of the week. So I've seen a few people in the chat already say that they want to rewatch it because Marcel really did have a lot of information in there. So I'll get that out to everyone, and I'll also be letting you know about the next session, which is in another 2 weeks' time.
Perfect. All right, I think we're going to press the big button and send you all away then. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Do keep an eye out for the recording. And look, once that recording goes up as well, that's open, it's live, it's available to whoever couldn't be here, whether they're registered or not. They live on our YouTube, so they'll always be there to refer back to. Thank you, folks.
Okay, thanks very much, everybody.